There is a secret in our family. My elder sister is not my elder sister, but my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother lived to be 100 years old, but she is still young and beautiful, gorgeous and charming, like a girl in her 20s. She opened a wonton shop, known as a gas station for men and a beauty salon for women. The wonton shop is located in a tube building in the old city. Not only is the location remote, but the prices are also very high. A bowl of wontons costs 100,000 yuan, and there is a limit of 20 bowls per month. This is the unshakable rule of the wonton shop, but even though the price is outrageous, there are still countless customers who come here to try a bowl of wontons made by my great-grandmother. At the end of July, it rained heavily. I looked at the steaming wontons on the table and couldn't help swallowing my saliva. This is the last bowl of wontons this month. The wonton soup of my great-grandmother is very heavy. The soup is fresh and fragrant. I can smell the tempting smell from a few meters away, which makes the glutton in my stomach cry. Grandma was sitting at the dining table, putting on makeup. She noticed my look and glared at me fiercely. "You loser, if you're hungry, go get some steamed buns from the refrigerator, don't stare at the wontons." Yes. I've never eaten wontons at home. Not only can I not eat them, but my mother, sister, and brother can't eat them either. Except for Grandma, no one in the family has ever tasted wontons. We were all very curious about the taste of wontons, but if we showed the slightest interest, Grandma would beat us with a stick until our skin was torn and our flesh was torn. Even my brother, who was the most loved by Grandma, was no exception. Grandma's voice was so sharp and thin that it made me shiver. I didn't dare to say much, so I went to the refrigerator and took a piece of cold steamed bun, and put it into my mouth one bite at a time. The frozen steamed bun was as hard as iron, and it hurt my fingertips. At 10 o'clock in the evening, someone knocked on my door. Grandma was admiring her bright red nails under the light. She winked at me when she heard the sound. I quickly got up and went to open the door. Standing outside the door was a woman dressed in luxurious clothes. She had fashionable curly hair, a long skirt, and a huge square-frame sunglasses on her face. After entering the door, she took off her sunglasses and looked around calmly. "My friend recommended me here. I heard that your wontons have miraculous effects?" She was right. Our wontons have miraculous effects. They nourish yin and yang, nourish the body, and seem to make people return to 18 years old. Men will be infinitely more energetic after eating them, and the strongest tonic will work better. Women will be able to regain their youth after eating them, and the effect is more amazing than the best medical beauty. This is the real reason why my wontons attract customers. The woman followed me in. When I saw her face clearly, I realized that the woman was actually a stranger. Most of my guests are returning customers. Those who can find a place to eat a bowl of wontons are either rich or noble. After all, one bowl of wontons is one less bowl per month. More people means more competition, so few people will recommend the store to others. This is the first time I have met a customer who comes for the first time since my grandmother asked me to help in the wonton shop. The woman's eyes passed over my face and finally stopped at my grandmother's face. Instantly, a touch of surprise bloomed in her eyes. My grandmother is gorgeous and charming, with a light and graceful figure and fair and tender skin like a newborn baby. Every frown and smile has a fatal attraction. No one who comes to our house to eat wontons does not marvel at my grandmother's beauty. My grandmother has long been accustomed to this kind of look. When she heard it, she just glanced at the woman lightly and nodded her chin at the wontons on the table. "The last bowl of July, eat it." The woman sat down opposite my grandmother and stared at the wontons with doubt. Finally, she picked up the spoon. The small and delicate wonton was put into the woman's mouth. I curiously watched the woman roll the wonton into her mouth, imagining the wonderful taste of the wonton, chewing the cold and hard steamed bun in her hand. But the next second, the woman's face changed. She actually spit out the wonton directly. Ugh! The woman climbed on the table and vomited without caring about her image. "What kind of meat do you use for your wontons? Why is there such a strong fishy smell?" Fishy? How is this possible? The guests who have eaten my wontons all praised the taste of the wontons. It was the first time that someone spit out the wonton directly. Is this person here to mess up the place? I huddled in the corner, observing the expression of the grandmother. Strangely, the grandmother, who has always been irritable, did not express any dissatisfaction with the woman's behavior. Instead, she looked calm, as if she had expected the woman to react like this. Facing the woman's questioning, the grandmother leaned forward with one hand on her face. Do you find it unbearable? Think carefully about why you came here. There was a hint of temptation in the grandmother's voice. The woman's eyes went back and forth between the grandmother's beautiful face and the bowl of wontons. She seemed to have thought of something, and a struggle flashed across her face. Half a minute later, the woman picked up the spoon again. She quickly stuffed the remaining 11 wontons into her mouth and swallowed them without chewing. After doing all this, the expression on the woman's face began to become ferocious. She covered her mouth hard, as if she was trying her best not to spit out the wontons in her mouth. Slowly, the ferocious look was gradually replaced by a blush. The grandmother twisted her waist and took out a mirror from the cabinet behind her. The woman looked at the mirror, touched her face with both hands, and her face showed shock and intoxication. The wrinkles on her face were disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The face eroded by time also became tight and delicate. The woman stood up excitedly. I want to reserve your wontons for next month. I will double. No, triple the price. Grandma shook her head, her voice light. My wontons are 20 bowls a month. One bowl is 100,000 yuan. This is a dead rule. No price increase, no reservations. But. Grandma paused, a dark light flashed in her eyes. Recently, the store is short of male customers. If you can introduce more male customers, I can consider reserving a bowl for you. Hearing what Grandma said, the woman who was originally disappointed looked up instantly, her eyes full of surprise. Grandma twisted her waist and went into the inner room. Little sister, send the guests away. After sending the woman away, I started to clean up the room as usual. A wonton that was only bitten a little bit came into view. The wonton skin was thin and the filling was thick. The crystal clear skin was bitten a little, revealing the pink filling inside. When I got closer, I could still smell a tempting fragrance. I looked at the wonton that fell on the ground and swallowed my saliva. I confirmed that my grandmother was not in the front hall. I slowly reached out and reached for the wonton. What a loser, what are you doing outside? Why don't you come and help? My grandmother's voice came from the inner room. I was so scared that I shivered and almost dropped the wonton in my hand. I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't have time to think about it, so I quickly picked up the wonton and stuffed it into my pocket. What a loser, you are so slow and can't do your job well. My grandmother came out of the inner room with a porcelain basin, cursing. Seeing that my grandmother's expression was getting more and more impatient, I hurriedly took the porcelain basin from her hand with a smile. The porcelain basin sank slightly in my hand. I realized that it was also filled with kitchen utensils such as rolling pins, kitchen knives, iron spoons, chopsticks, etc. The moment I turned around, I seemed to hear my grandmother muttering something in a low voice. It's better, useful, I should have kept a closer eye on it. I opened the door, and the voice was drowned in the heavy rain. I wanted to listen again, but my grandmother was no longer talking. It rained heavily tonight. My grandmother walked in front and knocked on the door next door. As far as I can remember, my grandmother opened a wonton shop. Although the family was rich, they never moved out of this tube building. In the words of my grandmother, one should never forget one's roots. For the convenience of life, my grandmother bought the 2 rooms next door for our family to live in. The wonton shop was in the middle, with one on the left and one on the right. The children in the family lived in one room, and my grandmother and my mother lived in another. We were standing at the door of my mother and my grandmother's room. After a while, the door was opened from the inside, revealing only a gap. There was no light in the room, and it was pitch black. I stood on tiptoe and looked into the room with my eyes slanted. But my grandmother grabbed the basin and pushed it to the ground. You bastard, are you itching to get up today? What are you looking at? why don't you go back to your room and sleep? My grandmother stared at me fiercely. She didn't go into the room until I turned around. I turned my back to the door and seemed to hear a strange sound in the heavy rain. It was my mother's voice. I pricked up my ears to listen more carefully, but suddenly heard a voice not far away. Sister, what are you doing standing there? Boom boom. Accompanied by thunderous sound, a flash of lightning tore through the sky, illuminating my sister's pale face. She stared at me with an inexplicable expression. Sister, come back soon, we should go to bed. I was startled, and cold sweat instantly soaked my back. When I came to my senses, I approached my sister cautiously. My sister held my hand and walked towards the door step by step. My sister is 3 years older than me. She just came of age this year. She has been helping in my grandmother's wonton shop since she was a child. It was not until 2 weeks ago that this job was passed to me. I don't know the reason. I just remember that my grandmother was very angry that day. My sister was also beaten badly, and I could hear her screams through a wall. That night, my sister returned home, and there was no good meat on her body. Strangely, after a few days, the injuries on my sister's body were all healed, leaving only a few light scars. I stared at the scars on my sister's arm in a daze. Suddenly, the elder sister who was walking in front of me stopped in front of the door. Sister, do you smell anything? I was stunned and shook my head subconsciously. But I saw a flash of madness in my elder sister's eyes. Sister, do you really not smell it? It smells so good. It smells so good. Do you really not smell it? Really? She held my wrist with such force that she almost crushed my bones. I'm so hungry. I'm really hungry. Sister, why do you smell so good? Did you hide something on your body? My elder sister looked at me, and her eyes gradually turned red. The corners of her mouth grinned in an exaggerated and weird arc. From a distance, it seemed that her whole face was torn into 2 halves. I was stunned by my elder sister's appearance, and I trembled uncontrollably. But my elder sister came closer to me. She sniffed me gently, and her slippery tongue slid down my ear to my cheek and finally stopped in the palm of my hand. My sister closed her eyes, her expression intoxicated. I smell it, it's the smell of wontons. Sister, you hid the wontons. Give them to me, she said, without waiting for me to react. My sister actually rushed towards me directly. I was thrown to the ground by my sister, my elbow hit the ground, and I sobbed in pain. My sister, who always loved me, ignored my tears, but got on her hands and feet and searched for something on my body. Soon, she found a wonton from my pocket. After staying in my pocket for a long time, the dough on the surface of the wonton had been worn into a blur, revealing only the pink filling inside, and there was some dust on it. The moment the wonton was taken out, I smelled an unspeakable stench, but my sister seemed to have seen some treasures, and stuffed the filling into her mouth without hesitation. She chewed it with big mouthfuls, her expression intoxicated. It was as if she had received great satisfaction. I watched my sister stick out her scarlet tongue and roll the meat from the corner of her mouth into her mouth, and I couldn't help but crawl on the ground and retch. The cold rain splashed on my arms. I crawled on the ground in a mess, with tears and snot all over my face. I don't know how long it took, but my sister helped me up from the ground. Sister, are you okay? I saw the concern on my sister's face, and then I felt that my sister was back, and choked up and asked, Sister, what happened to you just now? Hearing my question, my sister's face suddenly changed. She grabbed my shoulders hard and said word by word, Sister, you can't eat wontons, you must not eat wontons, understand? I was taken back to the room by my sister. My younger brother Yaozu was playing video games on the bed, and he didn't even look at us when he saw us back. My sister and I had long been accustomed to it, and walked to the bed in the inner room in silence. Suddenly, Yaozu's nose moved. He threw the game console down, and a look of disgust appeared on his fat face. Did you fall into the toilet? Why is it so smelly? It stinks, it really stinks. Smelly? Hearing Yaozu's words, I subconsciously took a deep breath. An indescribable fishy smell rushed into my nose, as if it came from my sister. Thinking of the crazy look on my sister's face when she swallowed wontons, my body couldn't help shaking. My sister, who was close to me, felt my trembling, and her dark eyeballs turned around in her eye sockets and stared at me straight, but Yaozu couldn't stand it. He fanned his nose with his hand with disgust, and gave orders from a high position. "You two losers are not allowed to go to bed today, go to sleep on the floor. If you don't listen to me, I will tell Grandma that you bullied me." My sister and I didn't dare to speak. Grandpa and Dad passed away early, and Mom has been bedridden since giving birth to my younger brother Yaozu. Since childhood, the three of us were raised by our great-grandmother. Our great-grandmother especially loved Yaozu. He had new and interesting things that my sister and I had never seen before, and he had eaten snacks that my sister and I had never eaten before. He had never had to work since he was a child, and all he wore and used were branded goods. More importantly, our great-grandmother was willing to send him to school. I was only a few years older than my brother, and when I was a child, I always envied my brother for having good things that I didn't have. But every time I looked at him for a second, I was beaten up by our great-grandmother. Later, my sister taught me, in this family, our great-grandmother is the first, and our brother Yaozu is the second. If we want to survive, we can only be obedient. What are you two bastards doing? Don't you want to live? Get away from me quickly, do you want to stink me to death? Be careful, I'll let my great-grandmother beat you to death. Seeing that we didn't move, Yaozu got anxious. Thinking of the feeling of a stick hitting my skin, I subconsciously shuddered. Just as I was about to explain something, I heard my sister whisper to Yaozu, "Sisters know we are wrong, don't tell Grandma. Haven't you always wanted to eat Grandma's wontons? Your second sister is helping Grandma with work. As long as you don't tell Grandma, your second sister will let you try wontons next month. How about it? Let me steal wontons? What is my sister talking about? Didn't she just say that I must not eat wontons? Why did she say that to Yaozu?" I looked at my sister beside me in disbelief, but I saw that she was staring at her brother Yaozu, with a dark look in her eyes. "Brother, do you think it's okay?" I opened my mouth to say something, and suddenly met my sister's gloomy eyes. Different from my entanglement. After hearing this condition, Yaozu couldn't help but widen his eyes that were squeezed by fat meat. Although my great-grandmother loves my younger brother very much, she is very strict about one thing: not allowed to eat wontons at home. Like me, Yaozu has long been curious about the taste of wontons. Unlike me, I have been afraid of being beaten by my great-grandmother since I was a child, but he is spoiled. Instead of learning from the lesson, Yaozu missed the delicious wontons even more. When he heard that his sister would exchange wontons, Yaozu's eyes lit up instantly. "Then it's a deal, I will eat wontons tomorrow. If you dare to lie to me, I will let my great-grandmother beat you two to death," Yaozu said, and waved his fleshy fist at us. I was anxious to explain, but my sister pulled me to the bed. "Sister, do you know where the people who have eaten wontons have gone?" She was very close. The breath from her mouth hit my face with an indescribable stench. I was trembling and speechless, but I heard her crawling to my ear and whispering, "Dead. All those who have eaten wontons are dead." Thunderous thunder came from outside the window. I shuddered suddenly, and heard my sister say, "Do you want to know why Grandma's wontons are so magical? Do you want to know what the wonton filling is? Go to Mom's room tonight and you will know everything. Don't worry, Grandma is not in Mom's room." After saying that, my sister turned over and went to sleep. No matter how I shook her, she ignored me. "Go to Mom's room tonight and you will know everything. Go to Mom's room to see. Go to Mom's room." My sister's words echoed in my ears like a spell. I have been curious since I was a child. If there is something I don't know, I will be very anxious and must make it clear to feel comfortable. From childhood to adulthood, among the three of us, I was the one who was beaten the most. Now that my sister has provoked me like this curiosity can no longer be eliminated. I lay in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. In the inner room, Yaozu's playing sound had stopped. A gentle breath came from my sister beside me. My sister said that Grandma would not be in the room. Even if my sister lied to me, Grandma should be asleep by now. I stared at the ceiling with my eyes wide open. After hesitating for a long time, I still carefully crouched down and got out of bed. The creaking sound of the door opening was covered by the sound of rain. My careful cat arrived at my mother's door. Except for my mother, Grandma never let anyone enter this room. She said it was for my mother's recovery. If someone else went in, they would bring the virus. Gradually, it developed into not being allowed to even look at it. I remember when I was a child, my younger brother Yazoo, who had his way at home, once disobeyed Grandma's words and opened my mother's door. Then he was caught on the spot by Grandma. That day, the whole building echoed with my brothers crying all night. My brother was beaten half to death. My sister also had her leg broken by my grandmother because of poor supervision, and it has not fully healed yet. I was the only one who escaped because of my young age, but I was also forced to watch the whole process of my grandmother's execution. There was a downpour behind me. I carefully hid in the corner, looking at the tightly closed door, and the regret in my heart was almost overflowing. The door was locked from the inside, and there was no way I could get in. I was just about to go back to my sister to ask about the situation. But I accidentally glimpsed a corner of the window. In order to prevent my siblings and me from secretly opening the window to peek, my grandmother pasted a thick layer of old newspapers on the window, and sealed the window with wooden boards, but because it had been used for a long time, the corners of the newspaper inside had curled up. There happened to be a gap in the lower left corner of the window, through the wooden board. Thinking of my sister's words and the strange noise I just heard, I couldn't help but slow down my breathing and lean towards the window. Through the gap, I could barely glimpse the scene in the back kitchen. The room was very simply furnished. There was a wooden table facing the window. The archway deep in the room was mostly blocked by the curtain, revealing only 4 bed legs and a vertical refrigerator. Apart from that, there was nothing else in the room. At first glance, it was empty. As my sister said, I didn't see my grandmother in the room. I didn't even see my mother. That's it? Did I hear it wrong just now? I curled my lips, feeling a little disappointed. Just as I was about to look away, I suddenly saw a pair of pale calves appear under the curtain. It was my mother. I recognized the owner of the legs at a glance. The year my father died unexpectedly, my mother hurriedly ran out of the house and fell down the hillside, leaving a terrible scar on her calf. And the calf hanging in the inner room had the same marks as my mother's. My heart trembled. I could hear my mother sobbing, "Grandma, you can't eat it anymore, you can't eat that stuff anymore. You'll die if you eat it anymore, you'll die." Grandma is in the room? I was so scared by this that I almost fell flat on my face by the window. Before I could recover. The next second, I heard the roar of Grandma from the room. "I've suffered for most of my life, and finally got this good thing, and you won't let me eat it? You bitch, do you want to kill me? New products will be available next month, and I've helped you get so many men, you bitch, why don't you give me meat?" Men? Meat? What is this? My mind is a bit confused. The wontons made by my grandmother are fresh and delicious. Everyone who has eaten wontons praises her craftsmanship. Not only that, my wontons also have miraculous effects, nourishing yin and yang, nourishing the body, as if it can make people return to 18. Countless businesses imitated, but none of them could learn the essence of my grandmother. Everyone guessed that the wontons in my family were made of special ingredients, but they never got the trick. I am also very curious about the secret of wontons, because I have never seen my grandmother buy goods. When I was a child, my sister helped in the store, and my grandmother never let me into the store. You can also say that I didn't pay attention. But since I took over my sister's work in the store, I have been staying with my grandmother. But I still have never seen her go out to buy. Now, my grandmother said that this is the meat produced by my mother? I held my breath and pressed my whole eyes against the window, trying to see more clearly. Inside the house, my mother cried and almost collapsed. "Let's close the store. This is not a good thing. Not a good thing." But no matter how my mother cried, Grandma remained unmoved. "Cry, cry, cry, you only know how to cry. I think you are not a good thing. You don't want to give me food, do you want to kill me, an old woman? The 4 wooden table legs in the arch shook twice, and a pair of slender legs fell to the ground. It was Grandma. My mother was also completely exposed in front of me because of Grandma's actions. I saw her half sitting on the wooden table, her clothes were messy, and her face was full of tears. More importantly, her lower abdomen bulged into an arc, as if she was pregnant for several months. And the loose long skirt on her body had been lifted to her waist, revealing a piece of white flesh. Where's the meat? You useless bitch. Where's the meat for this month? I found so many men for you, why can't you produce meat? Damn bitch. You want to kill me, don't you? Don't you? Grandma roared. After a while, she actually squatted in front of my mother. I widened my eyes. I only saw Grandma put her face close to my mother's calf, stretched out her bright red tongue, and licked it with an intoxicated look. Just think of it as Grandma begging you, produce more meat, I will die if I can't eat meat. My mother's body trembled violently. Grandma, this is not a good thing. Yanlong and Dad are gone, even Jowdy. My body can't stand it anymore. If it goes on like this, I will die, we will all die. Even Yaozu will. Boom. A huge thunder sounded. Lightning tore through the darkness and suddenly lit up a bright light. In an instant, I seemed to meet my mother's scarlet eyes. The words that my mother hadn't finished talking seemed to be suddenly blocked in her throat. She saw me. Cold sweat instantly soaked my back. I was so scared that I sat down on the ground. After I reacted, I used my hands and feet to crawl back to my room. After I opened the door, my heartbeat calmed down again. Grandma didn't catch up. Given how much Grandma valued that room, if she knew I was peeping, she would immediately rush up and peel off my skin. But she didn't. This shows that my mother didn't tell Grandma that she saw someone outside. After calming down again, anger surged in my heart. My sister said that Grandma was not in the room. She also deliberately induced me to peek. She lied to me. I stared at the bed in the outer room angrily, but found that there was no one on the bed. Where is my sister? Why did my sister disappear? I just felt a chill rushing to the top of my head. Just when I was at a loss, suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from the inner room. I was stunned for a moment, and then walked towards the inner room lightly. The curtain was lifted. The next second, I was stunned. I saw that my sister actually climbed onto Yaozu's bed. What was she doing? My brain crashed. The next second, I saw my sister opened her eyes and looked straight at me. Sister, you are back. Seeing that my eyes were always locked on Yaozu, my sister pursed her lips and her voice was a little hoarse. This is the result of eating wontons. Once you eat wontons, you will be completely out of control. After a pause, my sister added, don't worry, I gave him medicine, he won't wake up. I followed my sister and returned to the bed again. She looked at me and smiled bitterly. Sister, I'm sorry. I just lied to you, but it's also because I really don't know how to tell you. You have been curious since you were a child, and you are stubborn. You have to see things with your own eyes, to believe them. I was afraid that you wouldn't listen to me, so I lied to you to go and have a look. I thought that Grandma and Mom were asleep at this time, and they would definitely not find you, so I lied to you to go and have a look. How could my sister hurt you? My sister is right. She won't hurt me. In this family, my sister and I live in extreme difficulty. Grandma didn't allow my sister and me to go to school, saying that it was useless for girls to go to school, and they would get married when they grow up. From childhood to adulthood, my sister and I were trapped in this tube building, facing endless housework and endless beatings and scolding every day. In such days, we only have each other. Hearing my sister's explanation, my heart settled down again. My sister explained, her eyes fixed on my face, you saw Mom, right? Hearing my sister's question, the doubts and fears suppressed in my heart finally broke out completely. Sister, I saw Mom bleeding, and Grandma said that she wanted Mom to give birth to meat, and she licked the blood on Mom's legs. Mom said Dad was dead, and she mentioned you, and said she was going to die too, and we would all die. What the hell is going on? I trembled, my face was covered with snot and tears. In an instant, I recalled what my mother said, Grandma, this is not a good thing. Yan Long and Dad are gone, and even Zhao Di. Yan Long is my father's name. From what my mother said, the death of my father and grandfather is inseparable from this magical wonton. But I clearly remember that my father and grandfather both died in an accident. My sister looked at me and spoke slowly, Sister, do you remember the piece of white meat that Dad dug out from the ground when you were a child? Its name is Tai Sui. From my sister's narration, I pieced together a truth. 12 years ago, my sister was 6 years old and I was 3 years old. At that time, we still lived in our hometown in the mountains. Dad and Grandpa were still alive. Life at home was good, so Dad decided to build a new house in the village. But when the construction started, a white piece of meat was dug out from the soil. The village which said that the thing was shaped like white meat, hidden underground, and had a face like a human head. It was the Tai Sui recorded in ancient books. Those who dug up Tai Sui would surely be in great trouble. Only by whipping it 100 times on the spot and burying it in the soil can the disaster be avoided. The witch is very prestigious in our village. Dad decided to do what the witch said without hesitation. But when the whipping reached 90 times, Tai Nai, who had been ill for many years, suddenly became noisy. She said that a fairy had told her in her dream that this was a good treasure sent by the gods to keep her safe. If she didn't eat it in 3 days, she would die of exhaustion. She also said that if Dad and Grandpa didn't let her eat it, they wanted to kill her. While she was stunned, Grandma suddenly pounced on the Tai Sui and bit it without caring about anything. As Grandma bit it, her body became younger visibly, and even her pale and sparse head began to grow black new hair. A fatal fragrance came with it. Our village is feudal and superstitious. How could Dad and Grandpa not believe in such a miracle? They threw the words of the witch aside and started to eat the Tai Sui. Dad and Grandpa also became younger. They hid the Tai Sui meat in the firewood room, locked it, and didn't tell anyone. And my mother, who had just given birth to Yaozu, and my sisters who were serving her, were long forgotten. But as time went by, the complexion of my father and grandfather deteriorated rapidly, as if the yang energy was absorbed by the goblin. My mother and grandma seemed to be nourished by something, and became more and more beautiful. Until 2 days later, someone from the village came to my house and knocked on the door. They said that my father and grandfather suddenly fainted when they went out to work, and both of them had died. My mother hurriedly followed them regardless of her body that had just given birth. She accidentally fell down the hillside on the road, leaving a scar and contracting a serious confinement disease. Although I was only 4 years old at that time, I remember this incident very clearly. After that, our family left the small mountain village and came to the city to open a wonton shop. The business was not good at the beginning, but I don't know when there was a rumor that a beautiful fairy lived in the wonton shop on the outskirts of the city, and the wontons made by her could nourish yin and yang, eliminate diseases and disasters, and keep youth forever. The number of guests at home gradually increased. But from my sister's mouth, I heard another version of the story. After my father and grandfather died, my grandmother found that the Tai Sui was ineffective. After tasting the meat of Tai Sui, how could she let it go? So she started to eat Tai Sui like crazy, thinking that she must not have eaten enough to cause this situation. My grandmother's crazy behavior finally attracted my mother's attention. So one night, my mother followed my grandmother to the firewood room and found the Tai Sui locked in the house. At this point, my grandmother invited my mother to share it. Who knew that as soon as my mother approached, the Tai Sui seemed to have received some kind of signal and crawled into my mother's mouth. My mother's belly was bulging like a pregnant woman in her 10th month of pregnancy. My grandmother was furious and took a wooden stick to hit my mother, but saw a bunch of meatballs sliding off my mother's body. Those meatballs all exuded an attractive fragrance. Hearing this, how could I not understand? I stared at my sister in disbelief. Those meatballs are wontons? My sister nodded solemnly. Later, the witch found out something was wrong with our family and came to warn us. She said that Tai Sui is extremely ominous. It feeds on men's essence and energy, which can stimulate people's desires and make people fall into lust. It is an extremely rare evil thing and must be completely eliminated. But my grandmother had been blinded by greed. She drove the witch out and soon took our family away from the mountain village. A few weeks later, my grandmother found that the Tai Sui in my mother's body had lost its effect again. This time, she remembered the witch's words. The witch once said that Tai Sui feeds on men's essence and energy. Does that mean that effective Tai Sui meat can only be produced after men and women have sex? With this idea in mind, my grandmother knocked my mother unconscious, despite her objections, and found a homeless man to have sex with her. After the lovemaking, my mother's belly really grew bigger again. Also began to produce meatballs continuously. But the homeless man died suddenly soon after. So, the reason why Grandma asked customers to introduce male customers was because of internal. Instantly, I thought of what Grandma said to the female customer. My sister lowered her eyes and nodded. Yes, Grandma would say the same thing to almost every female customer. Later, I secretly checked with Yaozu's mobile phone, and all male customers who came to the wonton shop would die suddenly within less than 3 months. Those female customers who have lost their usefulness, if they can no longer introduce male customers to Grandma, Grandma will tell them that the wontons for this month have been sold out. And those female customers who have eaten wontons, if they can't get another bowl of wontons every month, their appearance will slowly age, and then they will age and die at a speed different from ordinary people. This is the secret of Grandma's wontons. Thunderstorms are raging outside the window. My sister looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. 2 weeks ago, my grandmother caught me eating wontons secretly, so she beat me up and threw me out of the kitchen. She wanted me to fend for myself. I was quick to sense that something was wrong. Sister, since you know wontons can kill people, why do you still eat them? My sister smiled bitterly. Do you think I figured this out myself? I don't have the skills. After being thrown out of the kitchen by my grandmother, I felt so uncomfortable, thinking about that bowl of wontons day and night. So, I took advantage of the time when Grandma and you were busy in the store and Yaozu went out to play, and I secretly stole some money and went out to buy a bowl of wontons. Originally I thought I was just greedy, but after eating the wontons I found that it was not the case. I only wanted to eat the wontons made by Grandma. After a pause, the sister continued, I went home in a daze, thinking if I could take the opportunity to get some wontons, but I met a familiar person downstairs. It turned out that the sister accidentally met the fortune teller who had warned Grandma. The fortune teller told the sister the truth of the matter, and coupled with some vague memories of childhood, the sister soon believed the fortune teller's words. My sister grabbed my hand excitedly at this time. Sister, I've eaten wontons and there's no hope, but you and Mom still have. As the carrier of Tai Sui, Mom has never eaten Tai Sui meat, so she can still live. The witch said that Mom has been offering sacrifices to Tai Sui for many years, and it's time for her to give up. If we don't intervene, our family will die. The next morning, I came to the kitchen on time to help. After cleaning, my grandmother came over from next door with a twisted waist. She threw a few banknotes at me. There are no customers today. Go downstairs to buy breakfast for Yaozu, a basket of buns and a bowl of soy milk. Don't buy the wrong ones. I pinched the money, feeling a little nervous. Everything was the same as our plan yesterday. Last night, my sister told me about her and the witch's plan. The witch was old and couldn't stand the evil spirit of Tai Sui, so someone needed to find an opportunity to stick the talisman paper near Tai Sui. My sister had been touched by the evil spirit of Tai Sui, so she naturally couldn't do it. This job fell on my head. According to what my sister said. On the first day of every month, because there is no meatball, my grandmother usually doesn't ask customers to come. At this time, she will call someone to buy breakfast for Yaozu. And while going downstairs to buy breakfast, there is a chance to get the talisman paper from the witch. I forced myself to calm down and ran to the nearby breakfast shop as planned. As expected, I met an old man who looked familiar at the door. I took the talisman paper from the old man, bought another wonton, and then ran back to the tube building. I asked the store to add more seasoning to this bowl of wontons, which was very strong and was specially used to fool Yaozu. Yaozu didn't doubt it and ate it with big mouthfuls. Late at night, my sister and I walked out of the room with our backs bent. We decided to split up into two groups. My sister went downstairs to pick up the witch, and I was responsible for sticking the talisman paper to the door of the room. The reason why the talisman paper was put in the evening. First, because today is the day when the male guest comes to the door, my grandmother and mother will not be particularly focused. Second, sticking the talisman paper during the day is too obvious. If it is discovered, the plan will fail. When I crouched close to the room, I could already hear the faint humming coming from the room. I crawled along the wall and was stunned by the scene inside. I saw my mother and grandma lying back to back on the wooden table in the outer room, and two tall men were hugging them face to face. I didn't dare to look at it any more, and hurriedly pasted the talisman paper to the door. As soon as I finished all this, the movement in the room stopped. The man was laughing obscenely and saying something, but I didn't dare to listen at all, and I bent over and retreated to the room. My sister and the witch had been waiting in the room for a long time. After a while, the tall figures of two men appeared on the window. They left. My sister, the witch and I looked at each other, and the witch whispered, "It takes 3 hours for the talisman to take effect. We can only act tomorrow morning. We need to get enough rest first." Yaozu in the inner room was drugged by my sister and slept soundly. I lay on the bed, a little excited. Just as I was about to say something to my sister, I suddenly felt sleepy. In the last second of my consciousness, I seemed to hear a low conversation in my ear. The next morning, I opened my eyes and found that my hands and feet were tied. In the cold room, I was thrown into the corner casually. I heard a conversation between several people in the inner room. "Don't worry, Mom. The witch said that as long as the tai sui in your body is transferred to Pandy's body, you can live." I widened my eyes in disbelief, and heard my sister choking and saying, "Yaozu and I have eaten tai sui meat, which was given to us by Pandy. Mom, she wants to kill us. If we can't eat tai sui, Yaozu and I will not be able to live." "No, no." I shook my head desperately, but I couldn't make a sound anyway. In this strange scene, how could I not understand that I was deceived? My sister didn't plan to die at all. She wanted me to replace my mother to conceive and raise Tai Sui, and she would become the second Tai Nai. The so-called witch was just a showman. In the corner of my eye, I saw Tai Nai's body falling on the wooden table, blood all over the floor, and she died with her eyes open. The curtain of the inner room was lifted, and my sister sat at the head of my mother's bed, crying and crying. My mother turned her head and stared at me. "What? She, a bitch, dared to give wontons to Yaozu? Bitch, how dare you? If Yaozu gets into trouble, I want you to go to hell with me." Listening to my mother's angry roar, a sudden pain came from my heart. Tears flowed unconsciously. Look. This is the mother I tried so hard to save. In her eyes, I am just a bitch and a money loser, and only Yaozu is her real child. My mother roared ferociously, not noticing that my sister, who was crying beside her, suddenly changed her face. But my sister still suppressed her anger and persuaded my mother in a good voice, "Mom, give Tai Sui to Pandy, you have suffered so many years and it's time to enjoy your life." Seeing my mother nodded in agreement, she walked towards me with a happy face. My sister looked at me and laughed crazily. "Pundy, help Mom and sister, we don't want to die. This is your only value." My sister dragged me by my hair and dragged me to the inner room. A pungent fishy smell came over me. For several seconds, my mother didn't react. My sister and I looked up at the same time and saw that my mother stared at us with wide eyes, and the spirit in her eyes gradually became gray. My mother died. My sister turned back suddenly and met a pair of cold eyes. "God, witch. How is it possible, how could it be? In fact, what my sister said is very right. I am a person with a strong curiosity and stubbornness. A long time ago, I began to wonder about the origin of wontons in my home. I am the bravest one among the three of us. Countless times in the middle of the night, I would crawl in front of my mother's window and listen to the lovemaking inside. I know that there will be men staying in my mother's room every night. I know that the wonton stuffing of grandma comes from those meatballs. I also know that my sister started to eat wontons secretly a long time ago. I also know that since she was caught eating wontons secretly 2 weeks ago, I have been replaced by grandma to work with her, and then induced me to discover the secret of wontons. All this is a trap set by my sister. She already knows that she can't live without wontons. But she is not satisfied with eating wontons every day. My sister wants to replace grandma and become the master who controls Tai Sui. And I, the younger sister who has never eaten wontons, is the one she found to support Tai Sui. In fact, everything my sister knows is true. The only thing she missed, I met the witch before her. The real witch. Back then, the witch kindly persuaded her, but was driven out of the house by grandma. Not only that, the sexually eager grandma also had relationships with many men in the village. One of them was the witch's youngest son. The witch's youngest son was a premature baby, and his body was weak. After the Tai Sui in grandma's body absorbed his yang energy, he passed away soon. The witch found that there was something strange about the death of her youngest son, and she had been secretly observing grandma. Soon, she discovered the dirty things grandma did. The witch, who wanted to avenge her son, made grandma's affairs public, but unexpectedly someone in the village leaked the news, and grandma took our family away from the mountain village overnight. After grandma left, many men who had had relationships with her died suddenly. The village was full of death. For so many years, the witch has never given up looking for our family. And after I met the witch by chance and learned the whole truth, I reached a deal with her. Tai Sui brings evil, but in the end, they are all ownerless things. To draw out Tai Sui, the supporter must take the initiative to hand it over. Our original plan was for me to play the role of the little daughter who cares about her mother's health, and use myself as a guide to induce my mother to take the initiative to hand over Tai Sui. Unexpectedly, after my sister unexpectedly met the witch, she thought of replacing my grandmother. After negotiating with the witch, we decided to play along. Seeing the witch who was originally acting as an actor return, my sister widened her eyes in disbelief. While she was in shock, I suddenly broke free from my sister's restraints. The bright yellow talisman paper burned outside the door, and the Tai Sui, which lost its support, turned into a pool of white meat mud and automatically fell off from my mother's body. Tai Sui was finally taken away by the witch. My sister stared blankly at the witch's back as she walked away, with a crazy look on her face. I'm not Zhao Di. I want eternal life. The Tai Sui meat is mine, and no one of you can take it away. The old woman deserves death. That old woman deserves death too. Suddenly, my sister pounced on me. She pinched my neck hard, her face was full of ferocity. Why do you want me to be the provider to replace the old woman? Just because I'm called Zhao Di? Just because I'm the eldest daughter? I want to eat wontons and break your beautiful dreams. You deserve to die, too, go to hell. My sister went crazy. The police who received the alarm information in advance arrived on time and saved me before I was about to be strangled to death by my sister. Grandma and mother died, and I was tied up in the room and became a witness. My sister became the only suspect. From my sister's words, I learned. So. Grandma also knew that my mother's health was not good, and she had prepared to let my sister replace my mother and continue to support Tai Sui. But these were discovered by my sister. The newly resentful sister decided to retaliate, which led to the following scene. The day my sister was sentenced to death, I inherited the hundreds of millions of assets left by my grandma and left the city with my young brother Yaozu. A few months later, Yaozu, whose essence was absorbed by his sister, died suddenly. So far, I have no relatives in this world. I lived a life of wealth and leisure, spent money on tutoring, and finally went to a pretty good university as I wished. Freshman year started. I met a beautiful rich second-generation roommate in the dormitory. I accidentally heard her talking on the phone, smiling coquettishly at the other end of the phone. That porridge shop is very famous, nourishing yin and yang, beautifying and nourishing the skin. You will never forget it after eating it once. Many people want to buy it but can't. Just believe me once, then it's a deal. Let's go to the porridge shop to drink porridge together next month. The end.